1045 The Team, your home for New York sports. The NBA draft upon us, but it's not really upon us if we're Knicks fans. Ian Begley from ESPN New York joins us right now, Knicks insider. Beggs, first and foremost, do you foresee the Knicks having any kind of anything in this year's draft?
I think they're going to try to obtain a pick. I think they have guys that they like, that they've targeted, and if those guys end up in slots that are obtainable, I think the Knicks are going to be aggressive. But I think you have to wait to see how things unfold on draft night. You have to wait to see who's available at what spot and what you're willing to give up to go ahead and get in that spot from whichever team owns the pick. So I think they'll have interest. I think they'll try, but it just depends on how things shake out tomorrow night.
Beggs, when you look at the fact, I guess, LeBron has said, look, I'm staying in Cleveland, but of course every Knicks fan, when there's the option that he might actually walk away, hoped he would come here. Is there any allure to New York right now? Is there anything that made the Knicks even, a remote factor if he had kind of walked out and decided to test free agency?
I mean, the only thing that you could think of is the idea that he likes challenges and he's buddies with Carmelo Anthony, so maybe he would see New York as a challenge, and he wants to, I'm sure, get Carmelo a ring if he can do that. That's the only thing I think the Knicks would have had going for them if LeBron tested free agency. But I wouldn't have seen that as a strong possibility, to put it mildly.
Beggs, they can't get LeBron, but what about Derrick Rose? How plausible is that?
Yeah. I think the Bulls would like to get rid of him, so I think he will be attainable. I think it's just a matter of, if you're the Knicks, what do you want to give up? Are you willing to deal a future draft pick to Chicago for Rose? You willing to include Jaren Grant in a deal for Rose? I think those are the factors at play here. And, I don't know what other teams are involved in trying to obtain Rose via trade, but I would imagine that the Knicks aren't the only team in the mix. So can they put a package together that's attractive enough to where Chicago pulls the trigger? I think those are conversations that are probably ongoing right now.
Ian Begley of ESPN New York, he's our Knicks insider, joins us right now. Levac and Wolf, 1045 The Team. Beggs, when you look at D Rose as a guy who follows the Knicks closer than anybody, is that somebody you want to kind of mortgage the future to bring in, give up a Jaren Grant and potentially a future first-round pick?
I think Jaren's a fine player. I think he'll be a very good player in the league for a long time. The problem with how things ended up last year is I think he thrives in pick and roll. I think he's at his best when an offense is based primarily on pick and roll sets, and that's not what the Knicks did in the triangle offense last year. So unless the Knicks change their approach drastically, I almost think it would make sense for them to move Jaren, who's one of their few tradable assets, and get him to a place where he could thrive in a different offense, and that makes him an attractive asset. So I think any trade that the Knicks are going to make is probably going to involve Jaren Grant.
Ian Begley with us. Beggs, so not getting LeBron. Doesn't sound overly likely that D Rose comes to town, but possible. Who are the guys that Knicks fans can realistically look at and go, okay, if this guy signs, we're at least the 8th or 7th seed in the East?
I think that they could get there by adding, B-level free agents. I think it would be fantastic for them if they could land like a Nick Batum, who I think is an A-level free agent, or obviously landed Kevin Durant. I mean, those would be fantastic upgrades. But if they're looking at the next tier guys, if you add like a Kent Bazemore from Atlanta, a player like that, young guy who can give you something on both ends of the floor, I think that's the piece that they're missing from last season. If Carmelo stays healthy and you add a guy like Bazemore to the roster and Porzingis is another year into his development, I think you could realistically look at them being, an 8 seed, a 7 seed next season in the Eastern Conference.
Beggs, did I miss Dwight Howard? I don't feel like I heard you say Dwight Howard's name.
I did not say Dwight's name. I've heard that Dwight will be interested in the Knicks and would be interested in joining the Knicks, would be interested in coming to New York. I don't think that that interest would be reciprocated because obviously the Knicks have Robin Lopez on the roster. But, if the Knicks make a trade for a guard and Robin Lopez is in that package, then obviously they'd be in the market for a center, and that's when things change. That's when you try to find a big, and maybe then there's interest in Dwight. Although I would assume if they make a trade for a guard, they don't spend, and Robin Lopez is in that trade, they don't go ahead and spend big money on a center. But we'll see how it all shakes out. This is a crazy season in the NBA.
Beggs, one big trade already happening this week. We've got the Hawks and the Pacers bringing Jeff Teague over to the Pacers. What does this trade mean, and does it have any kind of repercussions heading the Knicks' way?
Yeah, the one thing on the Knicks end is Jeff Teague was one guy that members of the organization had hoped to get back involved in trade discussions on. Mm-hmm. I know that the Knicks tried to trade for him at the trade deadline. They didn't have enough attractive pieces to give to Atlanta to make a deal work, but they wanted him, and I know there were people in the organization who wanted to try to make another run at Teague during this offseason, and clearly that's not going to happen now. So that's a name off the board for the Knicks. And, they were monitoring that situation in Atlanta, whether it was going to be Jeff Teague or Dennis Schroeder. They thought one of those guys was going to be available via trade. Now, neither of them will be available via trade because that trade has already happened. So you can take Jeff's name and Dennis's name off the Knicks list, and that's a tough blow.
Ian, got a hypothetical question for you. Okay, Phil Jackson goes out to Montana, eats the wrong mushroom, and is gone into some space time continuum and can't continue his job. You are now the Phil Jackson of the New York Knicks. What do you do to fix the team?
Yeah, I think, if I'm Phil, I'm in a tough spot because you have Porzingis, who you like to build around, but you also have Carmelo, who you promised that you'd build him a winning team in his prime when you re-signed him. So you're in a tough spot. I think you do swing for the fences. You try to get the Kevin Durant. You try to convince the Mike Conleys to come here maybe for less than max money. And if that doesn't work, you say, okay, we gave it a shot, and then you go after the B-level free agents just like you did last summer, and you try to add pieces to this roster gradually so that when Kristaps Porzingis is 25, 26 in his prime, you have a strong roster around him, and you hope that Carmelo Anthony is still in the picture and you can be in contention in Carmelo's prime, but I think you look more towards building around Porzingis, and when Porzingis will be ready to be a top number one option in the league. That's how I would approach things.
Ian Begley of ESPN New York. He's our Knicks insider. Beggs. So we had Mark Berman of the New York Post on this week, and Berman he did all but throw dirt on this Knicks organization.
Yes.
Like he said, can you imagine that as a Knicks reporter and fan, the best I can hope for is an 8th or 7th seed. Is that the best you can hope for? Are you slightly more optimistic than Berman?
I think, logically, they're coming 17 wins a couple seasons ago, 32 wins last year. So logically, that's the best you can hope for. Now, could something crazy happen where they hit a home run in free agency, or injuries befell teams ahead of them in the Eastern Conference and they sneak up to a higher seed? It's possible, but I think realistically, best case scenario is a 7 or 8 seed. And, it's interesting because Carmelo Anthony was very specific when he spoke to us at the end of the year, saying he wouldn't view sneaking into the playoffs next year as significant progress. He wouldn't view that as a successful season. He wanted to be in contention in the Eastern Conference. So it's just an interesting dynamic there with Phil and with Carmelo and with how things shake out.
Beggs, before we let you go, the rumors are that Golden State's going to go hard after Kevin Durant. Is that good or bad for the league if the Durantula ends up as a Warrior?
I think it changes that dynamic in the Western Conference, and it's always fun for the league, I think, when you have these super teams, because it turns into that they play the villain role. As we saw in Miami, if you're a Heat fan, you love the Heat. If you're a fan of any other team, you hated the Heat. So I think Golden State, where they took on earlier that role that people kind of gravitated towards them and praised them, I think if a Kevin Durant goes there, they turn into that villain team, that team that people love to hate. So I think that's great for the NBA.
He's Ian Begley for ESPN New York. You can check him out online at ESPN.com. He is our Knicks insider. Beggs, thanks for making time for us. We appreciate it, and I really hope the Knicks do some things this offseason to make it that much more fun to cover them.
Thanks, Beggs.
Thank you, boys. Take care.